Are you ready to do some 2D transformations on our content for our HTML page? And we can do all of this with CSS and applying transform property to our elements on the page. So you can do quite a bit with transform. You can move, rotate, scale, and skew elements. And these are all different values that you can associate with the transform. So make a selection of our elements. First one we'll look at is the div that we've got a class of 1. So let's make that selection of that element. And then we'll apply some transformations to that element. So using the transform, there's a number of options that we get by default that are within brackets. And we're going to use the translate. And what translate will do is it's going to move the element from its current position, and this is on the X and Y axis. So we requires some values within the X and Y axis in order to do the transformation. So let's update it to be 100 pix, comma separated, and we'll do 200 pix. And the colon is actually outside of the bracket. So let's see what happens. We refresh, and where did 1 go? It got moved down there. Let's give it a background color because it's a little bit hard to see. It's actually on top of another element, so give it a background color of red so that we can distinguish where it's located. And we see that we got the movement from its original position. We moved it down, and we also moved it over to the left. So I believe it was 100 pix to the left and 200 pix down. You can also subtract from the position. So if I want it to transform and move number 6, and let's give 6 a blue color so that we can easily see where the element is. And if we want to move it up, let's say subtract 200 off of it, we can do that, and that's going to move from its initial position, which was somewhere around here. It moved it up into the center, so now it's sitting just under 1. You can also rotate. So rotate is another really neat option that you have with CSS and transform, where you can rotate the elements. So that's again using transform. I'm going to copy the background property and also transform and update this to be green so that we can distinguish between the elements. And this time the property value that we're applying is going to be rotate. And it requires a parameter of the number of degrees that we want to rotate. So you can rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise according to the given degree. So let's do a 45-degree rotation. So that indicated with the number 45 and DEG to specify degrees. So watch what happens to the green guy. He gets rotated 45 degrees. And he's also the center point of where the element was is how it gets rotated. So you can also rotate it negative as well. And this is going to reflect in the content contained in there. So let's do a text align center. And I'll also do a width of the element. Oops, that should be width. And let's set it to 200 pix. So it's a little bit smaller, and notice it's rotated the content by the number of degrees that we've specified. You can also scale elements content, so that's another neat one. Just going to copy some of this out and update from here. So this one for transform, and we'll apply it to the element with a class of 3. So we want to scale this one. And scale is what it's going to do is going to increase and decrease the size of the element according to the parameters that we're providing. So this is width and height. So how we want to scale it, if we want the width to be twice, so that we'll set it at 200, and if we want the height to be 4 times its initial scale, that's what's going to happen here. Also, let's set the height of the element to be 100 pix. And we'll do an overflow hidden so that the content isn't overflowing. So now we've got the yellow one, and we've increased it. And notice also the size increase, and it's also the position increase. So by default, it sized it and resized it, but that also made it in a negative starting position in the top left-hand corner where it's starting. There's also, you can scale, so you can also shrink it down to half. So you don't always have to use full numbers. If you want to use a half number, we can do half And that also changes the dimensions of the element. So now it's half as wide, and that's why we've got the spacing there, because it keeps it within the same starting position, but because of the size, that's not getting reflected, and it's not moving where the size position is. You can also scale it to the X or scale it to the Y. So that's another option that you have. So you can specify if you only want to scale it to the X or scale it to the Y, you can do that as well. So let's set one to be pink and transform. And this is scale X, Y, and Z. So you've got a number of options of scaling, and this decreases the width of the element. The scale Y is going to decrease the horizontal value. And what it requires is a pixel number of how much you want to increase the scaling. So if I wanted number 4 to be a scale of twice what it initially is, I can just add a 2 in there. So that's going to make the pink one twice the size. There's also Y, which increases the height, so along the vertical axis. You can also skew the elements. So that's another option that we have, and I'll just move this content up here. So setting up for element number 5, how about we make this one purple? And for this one, we're going to apply a skew. So you can skew on the x-axis or on the y-axis. How about we skew on the y-axis? So it's going to require a number and the number of degrees that we want to skew it. So let's skew it 25 degrees. And this is going to be applied to this element where we're skewing it 25 degrees, which is different. Notice that it's also different from what we saw with the green one, because this is rotated, this is skewed, so that also skews the content inside. So there is a difference in how these behave. You can also apply a skew to X and Y axis with the skew value for the transform property. There's also a matrix, which combines all the 2D methods into one. So let's apply the matrix. And matrix is always fun to do. So add in to 6, and let me pick a color that I haven't picked before. Let's try aqua. So now this transform is going to use the matrix value, and matrix allows us to first scale. So whatever scale number we want to do, let's make it half the size. And yeah, this one is going to be a little bit tricky because the next value is the skew Y. So this is the vertical axis for skew. So it's giving a value for that. So if you want to skew it, you can enter in a skew value. So skew it slightly. The next value that we've got is the skew X. If you don't want to skew it, you can just have a 0 value. Also, there's scale of Y. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to picture how this is going to look. So if you don't want to scale it, you can just keep it at a scale of 1 to 1. And then there's the translate X and translate Y, and that was the movement positioning of where the element is positioned. So we'll just keep it at 0, 0, so that's going to stay in the same spot. And I just realized I already have the 6 value down at the bottom. So let's set it to footer and go back out and refresh our content. So that transformed it, and that is using matrix. So it allowed us to combine all the 2D transform methods into one, where we see that we've got the first value is the scale X, and then we've got the skew Y, skew X, scale Y, translate X, and translate Y. And the translates were where we were positioning it, so we could move it just as we saw with the first one. So I know we've covered quite a bit in this lesson, so do try out some of the 2D transformations, and coming up next we're going to look at 3D transformations. So that's still to come.